Reporters often focus on news that happens in their own countries. Of course, weather knows no borders. Let's bring in Kari Fulton, an environmental justice consultant, advocate, and cultural historian. Kari, we've seen this horrible tragedy unfolding in Africa, torrential rains, flooding, mudslides. Why is the impact, it seems, always so much more devastating in that part of the world, on the African continent?
Well, I think for one thing, you're talking about places that might not have the same level of infrastructure development as more developed nations. So if you don't have that infrastructure development, regardless of if you're in Africa or if you're in Puerto Rico, you're going to have those type of challenges, and it's going to be more extreme. You might also have some areas that might not be as industrialized as some other nations, and you also have large populations in smaller areas. So all of those things come into play when you're talking about extreme weather.
My colleague Jeff Moody in Beijing also has a question for you. Jeff, go ahead.
To ask Kari, then, some analysts then are saying that all these hurricanes and typhoons are sort of reflecting the fact that extreme weather is causing a long-term existential risk. I mean, with the US having withdrawn from the Paris Climate Accord, Asia, I presume, will see more frequent, intense and more destructive typhoons. What's your take on this? Do you think that's right?
Yes, I definitely think so. I think that a lot of times people tend to, as you mentioned, a lot of times people tend to look at their own domestic issues, their own country, but we can't look at climate change from a bubble of domesticity. We have to look at it from a global perspective, and us pulling out of these international agreements, it means that there's less funding, and that means that there's even more strain on other countries to help push the world up, and that's not fair. It's also a question of how much we as the United States emit when we talk about greenhouse gas emissions. If we're not reducing our greenhouse gas emissions, then we are then increasing global climate change, and that's a problem in and of itself.
Thank you, Jeff, and thank you, Kari. What would you tell people, especially people here in the United States, U.S. officials who don't see climate change as a real problem?
I think they need to check the weather in a real way. We have Hurricane Harvey, we have Hurricane Irma, we have Hurricane Jose right behind it. You have all the things that are going on with drought. You have huge fires and droughts on the West Coast. You have people who are being evacuated on the West Coast, on the East Coast, in the islands. How are we not checking the weather? How are you not looking at that? And anybody who says that climate change is not real or that extreme weather isn't something that we need to really look at and seriously address is actually being not only negligent, but deviant in what they're doing.
Well, Kari has a good point here. And out in the Atlantic, as she mentioned, Hurricane Irma has become the most powerful storm ever recorded there. A Category 5, the top of the scale, with sustained winds of almost 300 kilometers per hour. Wind gusts even stronger. Irma barreling through the Caribbean islands, already striking Barbuda. The British Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico are in its path. Florida also at risk. If Irma maintains its current strength, it'll be the second Category 4 hurricane or stronger to hit the U.S. in a single season. Hurricane Harvey resulted in a 1,000-year flood, and the cleanup in Texas could take years. So, Kari, how much is linked to climate change here, especially in the United States?
A lot is linked to climate change. I think there was a strong statement when we think about the science around what are we looking at? Are we looking at extreme weather? How is this happening? A lot of this has to do with greenhouse gas emissions. A lot of it has to do with if we're not reducing the amount of emissions that we're putting out. A lot of this extreme weather, we've had extreme weather in the past, but not to this extent. And a lot of it has to do with industrialization. It has to do with extracting really dangerous fossil fuels, coal, oil. We weren't always doing that. This is something that's happened over the last 200 years. And when you have leading countries like the United States, like Eastern Europe, Western Europe, that are really emitting a lot of that, Saudi Arabia, pulling out a lot of that energy, then that's going out into the atmosphere.
So, Kari, here's another big question. Yeah. Is this country, the United States, prepared to deal with disasters like floods and hurricanes?
No. I don't think that we're properly prepared for the type of storms that we're going to see with climate change. You have the Congresswoman from Puerto Rico who said no one is prepared for a Category 5 hurricane. And they're looking at 4 to 6 months, regions in their area that'll have 4 to 6 months without power after this storm. We're not ready. We need to have an infrastructure bill that really looks at that. We have bridges, we have canal systems, we have all these different infrastructure issues that we're already dealing with regardless of climate change. We have emergency management that needs to happen. This month, September, is actually Emergency Preparation Awareness Month for FEMA.
We'll see what gets done.
Right, so I think that's important that people have a plan. You know, I think there are a lot of people who might not have a plan and might not have the economics to evacuate. They're telling people in Florida not just to go to a shelter, but to get out of the whole state of Florida. Who has the money saved to get out of the state of Florida?
All right, we'll have to leave it there. Kari Fulton, thank you so much.